Hello and welcome to another episode of Game Develop Repeat. I'm Chris, and today we are talking about getting over it with Bennet Foddy. Getting over it is a frustration simulator. This game is designed to make you mad. This game is designed to make you lose it a little bit. Uh, I think this is like it's it's almost an attempt to make people meditate on their gamer rage. Like it will really set you off if you are the kind of person to get deeply invested in trying to beat a game. So let's talk background a little bit on Bennet Foddy because I think that gives some context about where this game is coming from. Previous games that he made include Quap, Clop, other games like GURP. It just sounds like I'm making a bunch of noises. Quap, QWOP, is a game where you control a runner in like 100-yard dash using QW and OP to control their calves and like quads. And then Clop is a sequel to that where you control a horse. GURP is GIRP is a game where you control a rock climber. All of these games are designed around weird, frustrating, like unintuitive controls. Like they're designed around controls that are like, yeah, okay, fine. Like it makes sense, but this is so difficult to use. And that's the history that he was building on, I guess, when he made Getting Over It. And it's inspired by a previous game called Sexy Hiking, which I'm not familiar with, but apparently is a huge inspiration for this game. So let's get into what the actual gameplay is, right? It's a frustration simulator. You are a muscular man with a sledgehammer inside of a big pot. You can't escape the big pot. I don't know. You're in it. And you are climbing a mountain of stuff. And anytime you fall, first off, it is so difficult to even start this game, right? Like getting to the base of the mountain is its own challenge at the start of the game. Like you have to get past this stupid little tree. Brutal little tutorial. All the controls are completely just mouse movement, and something about that mouse movement makes it so that if you lose your cool a little bit and you're like starting to contain it, maybe your arm tightens up a little bit, it gets harder and harder to control the game. It's great. It's really the connection between your mindset and your ability to play the game is pretty strong, which is cool. It's very interesting how like simple that is, and yet how extremely effective it is. Like the concept is simple, but it's executed so well, and it's very or maybe it's like a well chosen control scheme for what he's trying to do here. Throughout the game, you will hear him narrate things to you. Like he will kind of he'll encourage you, but it's the kind of encouragement where you're like, oh, okay, man, yeah, thanks, real helpful. Like you fall down and he's like, oh, that stings. It's okay. You'll get back up. And it's that thing where at that moment, the last thing you want to hear is encouragement. And it's perfectly timed. It's just this nice little psychological poke that really adds to the game. The map itself is kind of like weirdly abstract. Like it's just like piles of stuff. In the narration, he makes more sense of it. Um, it's good. It's good stuff. Now, okay, confession. I have not beaten this game. I thought decently far. Actually, I got pretty far. Maybe I should, this is dangerous. Maybe I should go back and keep playing it again. Then I'm not going to program for the next like 2 weeks. I'm not opening Getting Over It back up. I'm not subjecting myself to that right this moment in my life. Maybe in the future. Um, I've not beaten it. I've not beaten any of the other like weird, like extremely difficult, like torture genre games. Um, so this game sort of birthed a genre in my mind, or at least it popularized it. Maybe I just wasn't aware of it before Getting Over It really popped off and got popular. Um, but in this time period when streamers are very popular, it is very useful for them to have games to get angry at. So Getting Over It got really popular with streamers, a whole bunch of other people bought it, and then a bunch of developers, I'm sure, saw it and were like, that seems like a fun game to make. And it seems like something I could do with relative speed. So then you've got a bunch of other games that came out. You've got, what is it, Pogo Stuck, you've got Jump King, those sorts of games. I have not. I've not beaten any of those things. I've tried a couple of them. I've tried Getting Over It and I've tried Jump King. And I always reach this point where I'm like, part of me is like, I have to beat this because it's a challenge and it's telling me, hey, try me. See if you can do this. See if you can beat this, right? It's almost the same motivation that got me to beat Celeste, except Celeste was like a little bit more encouraging about it, and I was much more invested in the character's journey. These games, I do feel a little invested in Getting Over It specifically. The other ones I'm not that invested in, but yeah, the compelling part of them is the fact that they are just like taunting you with their difficulty. They're like, I bet you can't do it. I bet you won't do it. You're not going to beat it. Like it's just like playground taunting. You know, it's just that kid at the playground who's like, you won't do it. You won't do it. You can't do it. Oh, look at you little chicken. You can't do it, huh? You can't beat my game. Oh, like it feels that way. But at the same time, there's a reason that I like this one specifically, and that is the narration makes it feel like it is supposed to be a meditation on your own reactions to the game. As I'm playing the game, I always feel like it's like, I know that I could just be chill about this. I can just chill out and it'll be fine. But I feel it building up in my body and like the rage just like starting to build, slowly boiling over as I play. I think that's brilliant. I think that is actually really, really cool, useful game design. I think that's game design that makes people look at themselves and be like, and learn something about themselves in the same way that sometimes I'll watch a television show and there'll be a scene in a show that like unlocks a little emotion in me where I'm like, oh, I didn't expect to feel that way about that. Like, I don't want to, this is going to be a very old spoiler for Game of Thrones. So I'm going to give myself 10 seconds to spoil this, starting in 3, 2, 1. When Joffrey dies in Game of Thrones, I was so happy about that happening. And I was disturbed at how happy I was about that fact. Okay, end of spoiler. Having said that, moments like that in that show where where you discover an emotion that you didn't expect to feel at that moment teaches you something about yourself, and then you have to do a little self-investigation. When you're playing a game like Getting Over It, the repeated instances of getting frustrated, getting angry, getting some rage, you can end up going to this place where you're like, why though? Why am I so mad about this? And then you can look into that. You can keep playing the game. You can see how your anger gets in the way of you just moving a mouse. And then you can start to be like, how does my frustration get in the way of me programming? How does me getting mad at this puzzle or stuck on this one tiny element of something and thinking way too much about it? How does that get in my way, right? Like maybe I should just go for a walk when I'm in like when I'm really angry. Maybe that is the most productive thing to do if I'm really stuck. Um, so I think this game is a meditation on being stuck, and I think also it's so satisfying to note your own progress in this. You really get to this point where you can just rip through things that at the beginning were completely impossible. It's like you start and you're like, there's no way I'll ever beat this game. And it takes you forever to get to a certain point. And then you get good enough and you're like, oh yeah, that part that was driving me completely insane. Whatever, I got it. Give me 20 seconds. Like it took me 5 hours to get it the first time and I fell like 70 times. But now, give me 20 seconds on a good day. And then some days you'll just be like, oh, it's just really hard again. um, which is beautiful. I appreciate that fact of it. And you know that it's kind of all on you. There's not any randomness happening here. It's just you and this control scheme, and you've got to get to the top of the mountain. The rules are crystal clear. There is no ambiguity about it. It's you and a mountain. Go. Just like last week, we're going to do this question format. I've got a list in front of me. We're going to go through them and get into the nitty gritty of how this game is going to influence me and potentially you. First question that I'm liking here is how essential are the quotations and the taunting in this game? I think that's huge. I think that is one of the most important parts of this game. That little bit of like thought-provoking dialogue, that little bit of humanity. Imagine this game without any of the personality, without this guy talking to you. It's like having like it's like having your older brother over your shoulder, just like every once in a while being like, oh, you missed that. And you're like, I know, I saw. That's huge. It adds so much to the game. Now here's where that takes me in terms of my own development thought processes. If he hadn't thought of that, the game wouldn't have had the impact on me that it had. So these little things can make a huge difference. Think about the amount of effort that it takes to make an entire game and publish it on Steam and all of this, right? Think about the amount of effort that it takes to record some audio clips and set up a few cues and triggers within the game. It's comparative, it's such a small piece of the pie, but it makes such a huge difference for me. I think that little bit of flavor, that little bit of humanity in the game is probably just such a huge payoff for such a small investment compared to how much of a payoff it has in terms of the impact of the game. I think that's probably a very small investment. It could be that the way that the audio cues are randomized or something is really intense. I don't know. Maybe there's something like that, but my feeling is it's probably fairly straightforward because of how linear the game is, right? Now, let's one more comment on that. For my own development, that just tells me if I have some idea before, if I'm like, ooh, this would add so much to the game, I just need to look at it and go, realistically, how much of a time sink is that? Is that connected to a bunch of other mechanics in the game? How big of a deal is that? And how big is the payoff? Do I get a big payoff in terms of the feeling of the game, in terms of the amount of enjoyment I'm going to get out of the game for that investment. Is my time better spent elsewhere? Because like we can't just sit here working on one little game for 4 years and trying to make everything perfect. We got to decide what to include and what to cut. So I think finding those high payoff areas is huge. Okay, next part. Uh, what happens when you go extreme with difficulty? I think this varies. I think a lot of people will look at the Dark Souls series too and be like, that's an extremely difficult series. True. There's a lot going on there that makes it really good other than the difficulty. I think everybody always just talks about difficulty with that game, but I think a lot of it is like lore and the feeling of the world as well. Dark Souls also has a little bit of a control thing going, like controller scheme on that game is very important. You can't really cancel any of your actions, which makes its controls feel different than most games. Now, not to go off on that tangent because that's going to take way too long. Going extreme with difficulty like that in I think it invites a different kind of player, right? And I think simultaneously, maybe it's not even that it invites a different kind of player. I think that's kind of a weird angle for this. I know that's part of it. I don't actually fully agree that that's the main thing it's doing. I think what it's doing is rewarding mastery, and there is this inherent need as a human to feel like you have mastery of something. I think that is such an important like craving. And when a game is really difficult and you can see yourself getting better at it, and it's not just that your character is progressing, you are progressing. A lot of games go, your character is going to progress and then you're going to get better and then you're going to win, right? That's one of the things that sometimes in really weird ways gets under my skin a tiny bit with roguelikes. Sometimes I'm like, you're giving me a little bit, like, I just want a little bit less of a reward each time I die. I would just want to master it. I don't want new abilities. I just want to master what I have, right? But at the same time, I love those rewards. It's just sometimes I get in a mood, and then you know what I should do? I should just play a different game that gives me that. Because those roguelikes, they're fantastic. I'm apparently just not in the mood for them at that time. I'm getting sidetracked. The point of this to me is it's not that the difficulty is extremely high, like arbitrarily. It's that it's a feeling of mastery. It's that it is a game that is looking at you and going, yeah, you know what? This game is solid enough, and you are invested enough, and we trust you as a player to decide to stick with it long enough to master these skills. We don't have to just kind of glide through the game. We want part of the experience to be you learning difficult skills. There's a whole conversation about accessibility within this and difficulty options and all of these things. I don't know enough about setting up the difficulty of games to even have that conversation yet. I can only talk about this from like a very like broad level of, I like this idea that one of the mechanisms that one of the dials we can adjust is mastery rather than just thinking of it as difficulty. I think if I think of it as difficulty, then I get into this mode where I'm like, just up the enemy's health points, right? Like the old school RPG school, the RPG school of difficulty, where you just crank up everything's values and go, well, I guess you gotta grind for a while. Nope. No, thank you. If you've listened to the first episode, that's one of the reasons I love Legend of the Dragoon, is because a lot of the difficulty is not just numbers. A lot of it is, but there's a chunk that is a skill check. It is a mastery thing. So I like thinking of difficulty as this mastery dial rather than this raw numbers dial, right? There are games that do the numbers dial very, very well. There are games where you have to grind in certain ways. I mean, I don't have to, I love these games. How often do I talk about RPGs, right? Love them. But the mastery dial is an interesting angle to think about that from. I'm going off on this. Okay. Last part. How am I impacting the player's emotions? This question, this idea, this concept, I'm in love with this concept. So many games that I love are designed in this way where it is clearly going to have an emotional impact on the player. I'm going to go with 3 right off the top of the head. Celeste is like made to help people like process like internal conflict. It's incredible. Uh this game, right? Getting over it. It is made to make you get frustrated and feel that pain. There are games like Cook Serve Delicious is made to put you in this like hyper stressed out flow state. Well, I should probably do an episode on that one. And then let's give it one more. I had one more in my brain. What is it? Forager. Forager is also a crazy flow state, but it's different from Cook Serve Delicious. Cook Serve Delicious is a flow state where you are stressed out for some reason, like it's like really stressful. Forager is a flow state where you feel like you are like at a slot machine. The only time that I played a video game and been scared of it was when I played Forager. I played Forager and I was like, this game is making me feel way too excited about this game. And I'm like worried that I'm going to just never stop playing it. I stopped playing it pretty quickly once I finished everything. Thankfully, that game didn't have any kind of infinite loop to it. And I like the extreme intensity of it did burn out pretty quickly. But there was a moment while I was playing that game where it was like, uh-oh, this game is ticking too many dopamine things, and it's just too intense, right? That's a little bit different from the emotional impact stuff, but all of these the way that you are impacting the emotion of your players is so cool and fascinating. Like, is your game going to make somebody uncomfortable? Uncomfortable, excuse me. Is your game going to make somebody happy? Is your game going to help somebody explore some emotion that it triggers in them? What is the goal here? If that is the goal, a lot of games are just going to be, hey, this is just sick gameplay. Like, this is, you're just going to enjoy this gameplay. It is great, right? I love a good war strategy for the gameplay. And oh my God, I miss war strategies. I just want to throw that out there really quickly. We're going to talk about that later. But the impact that games have on your player on the player's emotions, like, are you making a game that's designed around emotional impact? There's probably going to be more story involved in that, but maybe not. I mean, Cook Serve Delicious is not that story driven, but it still has like this intense stress thing. The mechanics themselves can feel very stressful. I mean, getting over it is not story heavy. It's just got these quotations, right? That is such an interesting question to ask yourself, but I kind of think I would have trouble at this phase of my kind of development process. I would have trouble figuring out the answer to that question before I've made the game. Like, I think where I am right now, I need to make a couple little games to even start getting to the point where I can start thinking about how I'm going to impact a player's emotions. There's like a couple things I can do, like I can make it harder or easier, like more stressful, less stressful, more goofy, less goofy. But I think right now I've got so much to contend with in terms of just like figuring out the programming of things and getting the mechanics working, that it would be biting off more than I can chew to really dive deep on emotional impact until I've finished making like one or two little games, right? Because I think I won't finish a project if I start trying to go in on emotional impact. I'll end up doing that thing where I'm like, here's a 4-year project for my first game. I am not a fan of that. Too much investment. I'm trying to do like 6 months or less for the first few projects, right? Even shorter would probably be better, but at the moment I'm doing a slightly larger project. Okay. Speaking of that, the 4 years turning into a burnout thing, let's go. Oh man, I haven't even talked about my own game development. I have a bunch more questions. Really quickly, game development, I continued sorting out spaghetti code. I fixed some crazy bugs that were really annoying with the jumping in my platformer. I have spent the whole time that I've been making this platformer is just fixing the player controller. Everything I do is just adjusting the player controller, design some levels, find a new bug in the player controller, fix that. I was sticking to the ceiling for some reason. There's just all this stuff going on. But I fixed a ton of bugs there. And then I actually have questions. These two questions are tied in. One is actually a question for you, and I would appreciate your feedback on this if you can. So, first off, what fields have good crossover with game design, game development? I was thinking about this because I'm having trouble figuring out whether or not to, like, I want to start reading some game development books. It doesn't seem like there's a ton of them. It seems like there's like 10 books that I see recommended a lot. Maybe it's just that those are so good. But I want a little bit more, like, I want a breadth of knowledge, right? I want to learn about a whole bunch of different things that go into game development and game design. I don't want to read these specific, like, engine specific books. I want underlying concepts. I'm really big on that. So what I'm thinking is, what fields have a good crossover with game design that I can then draw from? If there's not a ton of books about game design, and maybe there are, and I just haven't, like, I haven't done a lot of research on this yet. So maybe I'm just haven't done the research yet, and maybe there's just way more than I've realized. But if there aren't that many, are there books on architecture that have a high rate of crossover into level design? Are there books on graphic design that connect with, I don't know, character design, menus? I mean, graphic design is obviously very relevant, I guess, on the art side of things. But, like, I mean, there's writing, there's, I guess, mythology connects with game development. I'm wondering if there's anything. First off, if there are game development books that are must read books, get in that Discord. Let me know. If there are games that are like niche that you don't see people constantly talking about, if there's some little game dev book that if you Google top game development books, it doesn't pop up, and you've read it and you go, I love this book, send me the info. Because I'm at a point where I'm about to try to just make a list of game dev books. Game dev, level design. I honestly, I need to go in on some audio stuff too, but I need to shore up some of these weaknesses first because my background is more audio heavy. And then if anything pops out to you where you go, oh, I know this little thing about, for some reason my brain is stuck on architecture and I guess mythology too. But, like, architecture to me seems like it would be really useful, but I could just be off base because I know nothing about it. I may have to look into it and, like, read an architecture book or something. Anyway, if you got thoughts on that, I'm probably just going to make a books channel in the Discord. Let's go to the final section of the podcast about sustaining this whole game dev career. In keeping with the rest of this episode, we're going to talk about what to do about getting stuck, because that is something that happens a lot that I haven't actually given that much explicit thought to. I think about it, it happens, I get out of it, but I haven't really explained what prevents me from getting stuck and what I do when I do get stuck. Let's go in on this because it's really important, and I think it's a huge part of programming. Is like we're constantly running into problems that we have no idea how to solve. Like it's just like it's intense. It can be a lot. So there's a lot of different kinds of getting stuck. I'm going to talk about the smallest scale one first, and then talk about some other like various things. I think the smallest version of getting stuck is actually running into a problem and you're not stuck yet, but then you distract yourself and then you become stuck. I think this is something that's really, really easy to fall into, but really hard to notice. I think there are a lot of times where if you're falling into this trap, I think it's hard to know that it's happening because you're getting distracted. Because the way the mind works, you don't remember the things that you lost once you got distracted, and you don't realize that it's making you get stuck. Here's a visualization of this, or an example of this, I should say. You are coding, you run into a little bug, and then you look at it and you go, oh, I don't immediately know how to fix that. And then your phone dings and you look at it and it's a message or whatever, and you go, oh, I'll handle that later. You put your phone back down, you look back at the screen, you get back to trying to fix the bug. The context that led you to fixing the bug is now cloudy. You've lost some level of detail of your understanding of what led you to that moment. It's like when you're having a conversation and you try to backtrack the conversation and you lose little threads of it, and you're like, why can't I remember what that was? It is my assertion that happens to you and you don't notice it anytime a little distraction like that pops up, and that results in you getting stuck more often. My solution to this is to set up your environment in a way that makes it very difficult to get stuck. By the way, that example isn't even the version that happens to me the most. What happens to me the most, the really common version of this for me, is I run into a problem that's a little bit tricky, and then I go, something in my brain just goes, hey, just why don't you check your phone? Just check your phone. It's maybe something's going on. Check your phone. And then I check my phone and my brain is like, yes, don't have to deal with this right now. I can just chill for a second, right? Like I just pop right out of it voluntarily. The problem with that is, like, it's a habit. Like you'll just kind of do it without thinking about it. I lock up my phone. That's my move. I have a little thing that I lock my phone in. I cannot conveniently access my phone. If there's an emergency, I can, it's fine, whatever. But it is difficult for me to access my phone. It is easier for me to keep working on whatever problem I run into coding than it is for me to go look at my phone. It's also easier for me to keep working on programming than it is for me to start up a game and start playing it. That's not even a habit I've ever considered doing, which now that I've said it out loud, I'm like, I got to make sure I don't start doing that. It needs, in my mind, to be very easy to do the things that you want to do in the environment that you're in. And this doesn't mean that you have to like perfectly polish every detail of your environment. Like, no, just don't invite distraction, do invite focus. That's my thought process about it. I invite focus as much as I possibly can, and I don't try to force myself to focus. I just invite it. If I'm feeling really sleepy, I'll do something to wake myself up a little bit. If I'm feeling way too wired, I'll put on some music that'll make me like able to focus in a little bit. Music can be useful. That is the one thing that's like a little distracting, arguably, that I'll have going on while I'm coding. I tend to avoid lyrics, and I tend to avoid using any music that is new to me, unless it's like something that's not going to be that interesting. That's the setting up the environment element of this. The other part I want to touch on, because I do think this is important enough to add on at the end here. There's other forms of getting stuck that are like the Bennet Foddy getting over it, getting stuck, right? The kind where you're like getting really frustrated with a problem and you're just like starting to get to that point where you're like, this problem is driving me insane. Why can't I fix this? What is it? And then you're thinking about why you can't fix it. And now you're no longer thinking about the problem. In my mind, that's when you step away. That's when you go, okay, I don't actually need to solve this right now. It's holding me back. This is the time for a distraction, but a good distraction, a processing kind of a situation. This is the moment where you go for a walk. This is the moment where you take a nap if you're feeling pretty tired. This is the moment where you do some stretches or some kind of like creative exercise or something that you can tune out a little bit, but you're not fully engaging your brain in some other thing. You're just letting yourself tune out a little bit so that the back of your mind can kind of process quietly because it knows it's important to you. You were just getting mad about it. Your mind is going to start to sort this out. And then you'll come back to it and you'll look at it and you'll go, oh, or it'll just pop into your head while you're doing something else. You'll be going for a walk, not thinking about it, just enjoying the cool breeze and the trees and whatever. It'll go, oh, that's the solution. Versus sitting there and just losing your mind working on the same thing forever. So that's one of my other moves for getting stuck. The other one, there's the type of stuck where you just don't know something and you just have to find it. And it just takes a while and it's just a pain. And that's it. You just have to find it sometimes. You just have to Google things differently. Google it a whole bunch of different ways. Hit it with a different search engine even. Go into like the Unity docs or see if there's a different solution to the problem. Just approach it differently. I had something where I just couldn't figure out how to solve this weird little... I have this collider problem on my game I'm working on. I have this issue and I was like, oh wait, I can just implement this other thing and then it's good. How do I explain this? I have a problem where if the character is up against a wall while also touching the ground, if they jump, they get abnormal behavior. They get like stuck to the wall in a weird way, and then they don't stick to the wall in the way that I want them to. It's really strange. So their x-axis gets stuck, but they're still moving up and down, basically. And I don't, that's not intended behavior. So I just made it so they can't get in that position. I just made it so that it's like, oh, the player just can't get there. Anytime they try to go there, they're just going to automatically jump onto the wall and attach to it from a low height instead of going into the corner and causing this whole big bug. I'm probably still going to tweak it some, but I wanted to see if there was another solution that would work out. And what do you know? There was. So that's the other thing, is you can just find a creative solution to whatever problem you're stuck on. So setting up the environment, taking breaks, and finding different angles to approach the problem. Easier said than done, but if you start making these things practices, it'll become easy before you know it. One last note about this. Strongly recommend a book. I asked you guys for book recommendations. Here's a book recommendation from me that is very relevant. It is called Deep Work by Cal Newport. If I hadn't read that book and started focusing on letting myself have a block of time to really focus in on one thing, I would not be figuring out how to program right now. I would have no idea what I'm doing at all, and I would not be developing these skills. So highly recommend that book, Deep Work by Cal Newport, and recommend setting up your environment for focus. It'll help you get stuck less. Okay, that is everything for this week. Look forward to next episode, which will be episode 10. That's kind of exciting for me. I'm going to see if I can figure out, like, maybe I'll pick a game that I just really love for that episode. But that's everything. I will talk to you next time. Have a good one. Make some stuff. Have fun with it. See ya.